welcome. I feel like we have all had you doing double, triple, quadruple duty this week. Otis just got off the stage maybe 20 minutes ago, and here you are again. And Wynton, not one but two performances, let alone all the rehearsals. And Kate, you closed today, and it's one thing to write the play, but let's star in it too. So thank you for being here. I also really love that each of you has developed a relationship with Chautauqua, and so it's special to have you here in our 150th year. And I'm wondering if you could just share some reflections. I'm going to go through each of you on this topic around our theme that Wynton helped us curate. So, Wynton, first of all, congratulations on two incredible performances of All Rise.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I know that this is a special anniversary for that piece as well. I was sitting with a friend of yours last night, Cece Chan, who said she last saw it in Sydney, which reminds me how far and wide this piece has gone. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the reception for the piece has evolved over time, and what has your experience been like with the piece this week at Chautauqua and with the Music School Festival Orchestra?
Well, I think every time we play it, it creates a feeling first on the stage because the choir is separate from the orchestra and our band, so we all come together, and also our band sits in the middle of the orchestra, so it's like you have another body inhabiting your body. So you have to make space and room, and you have to learn to listen across a larger distance, and you also have to welcome people that you don't normally play with into your environment. And the choir brings another type of special community feel. Many times the choirs are volunteers, and they come with a depth of feeling and a passion about the music because they've worked for months on very difficult harmonies and things that require a lot for them. And every time we've played it, it's always been a big reception. I always kind of go off of the feeling of the choir. And this week, because there's so many younger people and older people in the choir, and older of us in our band, and Tim's fantastic conductor. We were laughing about the fact that he was 3 months older than me, and that only people our age remember that Johnny Quest was the cartoon that ended Saturday Cartoon Day. We invariably talked about the things we have in common, and it's been a wonderful experience for all of us in the orchestra. Many of our orchestra members are also composers, and they run jazz programs in their local area. They have had parents that were educators and advocates. So with our younger people, I always want to just hug them. I love all of them. I mean, I get full sometimes just the relationship I've had with some of them I knew before. One kid showed me a picture of me holding him and his brothers up when they were 5 and 6 and 7 years old, and the mama was trying to grab them, and they're spilling out of my arms, and they took a picture after a gig 15 years ago or something like that. And it was a fantastic experience to play something difficult and to look across and see them and experience the collegiality that comes with trying to achieve very difficult things. And we were all filled with nothing but love in the orchestra, and for me, it was a fantastic highlight.
So 25 years after its original creation, has it changed? Is it, as you resurrected this in celebration with us, has the piece itself morphed for you, or?
No. The orchestras play it better because they're familiar with it. The younger people have a much clearer understanding of the music. I'm now 40 years older than them. When we first premiered it, I was younger than most of the people on the stage. Wow. And the younger people resonate with the message of it. It's a very fundamental message of universal humanism. See, they're calling me now because they don't like to hear that word. It's non-tribal, and you have to work for it. So, no, and for me, no, it's always a pleasure.
So, Kate, speaking of assembling pieces, I'm wondering, we're looking this week at collective experiences in the way that the arts pull people together. You, as your bio noted, you are a deeply sought after playwright, experiencing wild success. How do you think, as you're getting ready to tell your own stories and create stories, how does that notion of a collective experience play for you? And it's really interesting given this play, given how there's such a singular focus on one individual, but I'm just curious how this week's theme resonates in your own work.
Yeah, I think why I'm so, why I kind of can't quit the theater is because I'm addicted to the cathartic experience that theater is. Theater, much like live music and a spiritual experience, is what differentiates it from film and TV is it is like a sand mandala. It is different every time, and it's ephemeral, and it will be gone, and it is formed by the people in the room together. They've done studies on audiences that when an audience is really watching a play and really having that experience, their heartbeats start to sync. So that is what I'm get sort of high off of, is that a bunch of sort of scrappy artists come together and do a frankly insane thing, which is try to make a play. But the play, you all come in with your own ideas and you try to sort of make it a work of living art together, but the art is never complete without the audience. That is the last cast member and the last collaborator, and it is different every single time you do it. So yeah, it's really, really meaningful to me, and I think if I was not interested in a collective experience, I'd be a novelist of some kind, probably not writing very good novels, honestly. Yeah, I think, and what's been so gratifying, especially for the world premiere of a play, is we are learning in real time how the audience is affected by this piece. So you sort of ride the wave of the audience. You hear where the laughs are and where they're listening with you. And when you're on stage having this experience, it's sort of hard to put into words because you can feel it. It's like a surfer catching a wave, but and you can feel when you lose it. And so since this play is going to New York next, we'll be working on just refining that. But this play, the DNA of the audiences here in Chautauqua will be in this play because it taught us what it is and what it should be. So, yeah. So thank you.
I want to say two things based on that. One is, I don't know if you heard, it goes to New York next.
Yes.
So congratulations for that. But I also appreciate that you called out the role of the audience, and I'm not sure everyone understands the difference between a world premiere and a more established play. So can you share a little bit about, as you're getting feedback from both the cast, from the production crew, from audiences,
Sure.
what's happening in your process this week? It's not so what's your evening like after?
Well, I want to give a shout out to Chautauqua Theater Company, Jade King-Carroll, the artistic director, and Emily Glinick. They're running this theater together, and the entire staff. This is becoming a really exciting place for new play development at a time when, to be frank, new play development is dying in this country, which is a problem. If we are telling the same kinds of stories over and over again, if we are not advancing the art form, there is something wrong with us, and our art form will become less and less relevant. And theater is a cathartic, as I said, response to community. It's why the Greeks invented it, so communities could come together and have experiences where they don't know who each other are, but they all feel things together. So many congratulations and thanks to Jade and Emily for creating a home for new play development so we can try new stories. Yay. So a world premiere play, you're constantly working on it. We will do work on it. We start rehearsals in October off-Broadway in New York. Come see us. Light pitch. And it will be doing work on it now, but as we were building the play, we're very much all bringing our own ideas into the room and trying to find the best idea out of all those ideas. It's a bit like making a collective puzzle. And yeah, the play is teaching you what it is, whereas a play that's already been done, the text is not changing. You are sort of trying to get to a pre-established idea or a set of ideas. A world premiere play, you are building the car as you are driving it. So it is sort of like an exciting and also slightly terrifying time. And yeah, so this is a really exciting part of the sort of birth journey of this play.
Well, thanks for doing it here. Otis, I got to talk about double, triple duty. You've been preaching since Sunday around our companion interfaith theme, Rising Together, Save Us, and Look Beyond. I was picking on Otis. If one more person tells me I needed to listen to his sermon because he's calling us all to be better people, and what did I think about that? Every day, buddy. Every day. But you are in the zeitgeist of trying to bring communities together toward greater understanding through a faith tradition, through that lens, at a time when our country and really the world is wrestling with the notion of religion. So many folks that are claiming they have no religious faith. How is your work working to foster that unity and collaboration around this theme? I think about whether it's your book or your sermons, you got a heavy lift there.
Well, first, I have to say that I am absolutely honored to be on this stage with two luminaries. I'm like fanning out right now. So like, I'm really, really appreciative for Chautauqua to give this opportunity. I think that something that is unique and powerful about the Black church tradition, and when I say the Black church tradition, I'm not just talking about a church with Black people. There is a particular tradition that brings together kind of a unique spiritual and theological framework that Black people hammered out in these, as Du Bois says, these yet-to-be United States of America. And there's a requirement to know other traditions to be effective. Where other traditions are just stuck in their space, the Black church tradition at its best says that not only must I understand the Black tradition, but I also must understand the European tradition. I must have an understanding of West African, Caribbean. It becomes global in your understanding, and it's best communicated, if I may share a story, and I traffic in stories because I'm a preacher, forgive me. But Dr. King demonstrated the amalgamation, the uniqueness, or if I may borrow a phrase, the gumbo of the communication.
Talk about
when he stood on the Mall in 1963, he did something that so many people miss, that when he wrote the message, he writes the message, and the phrases that we know at the end were not written. There was improvisation, it was extemporaneous. One story says that Mahalia Jackson could feel that the crowd was restless and says, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." And Dr. King, like a great DJ or an amazing jazz musician, then picks up a phrase from a woman by the name of Reverend Prathia Hall, who prayed in Albany, Georgia, and said, "I have a dream this day in America." He takes that and then begins that phrase, but then brings in the Constitution of the United States and says the underlying framing. So his text then becomes the Constitution, not Scripture, but the Constitution. And then he does something that only the Southern folks who were black knew that he was doing. He threw so much shade at the KKK in the last few moments, and people completely miss it because they think it's rhetorical flourish. He says, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain. Let freedom ring from the Great Smoky Mountains. And so my parents, they were there, and they said black folk were shouting like crazy because a double entendre just happened. Because Stone Mountain was the headquarters of the KKK. Smoky Mountains was the headquarters of the KKK. So he kept going to spaces and basically saying, and this is the way that it was heard, there will come a day where we will wipe out domestic terror in America. That's what was being said. And so it was these two things, and because he comes out of what was known as the black social gospel that was promoted and lifted up at Morehouse College, he is coming out of a tradition that says it's not possible for me to be fully who I am, located solely within the silo of my community. That being black means that I am global in nature and local in what I draw from. And local and global at the same time. And that's what happens when we bring the best of our tradition, but we are unafraid of other traditions. That all of a sudden something is merged and something new is created in the process. And that's what I believe that the faith community at its best does its best work when it refuses to hide in the fear of fundamentalism, but stands up tall in the broadness of God's possibilities.
So each of you have been a special part of us celebrating our 150th year. And can't believe we close it this weekend, this summer assembly. But each of you also holds tremendous reverence for generations that came before you. And Otis, you come from a long line of preachers. It was nice to also meet your mom last night at All Rise. I'm wondering how you, as you do this new work, as you try to advance social justice in this country, how you think about calling on that generational lineage that you come from. We talk a lot about that here, that tension of tradition and innovation. You want to bring the best of what has been, but you want to push yourself to be better. How does that play out for you in the work that you're doing?
It's a requirement. I learned from my parents that you don't do, the work that we do is not for ourselves. It's for a generation that's not yet born. Our indigenous brothers and sisters say, I'm working for 7 generations ahead. But I am building on the ground of my ancestors. So my grandfather, who I never met, was a sharecropper in Georgia. And in 1946, he attempted to vote and was unsuccessful in his attempt to vote. Went to 3 different polling places and walked 20 miles. And his wife had died when my uncle, my father was about 11 years old when she had passed. And my grandfather refused to get remarried. He had 5 children because he was so deeply in love with his wife, my grandmother, and said, I don't want anyone caring for my children but me. So he's a single father in the Deep South and wanted to demonstrate how do we move from this sharecropping peonage system. And he attempts to vote against a person by the name of Eugene Talmadge. And Eugene Talmadge had stated that if you elect me, no Negro in Georgia will ever vote. And so that's why he went out to polling places to vote. Every time he got to a polling places, they would say, boy, you're at the wrong place. You got to go 9 miles down here. You're at the wrong place, 9 miles, And so he's walking in rural Georgia. You have to understand how dangerous it is for a black man to walk in rural Georgia. And he gets to the last polling place, they see him. And right when he gets to the door, they close it in his face and say, if you'd been here 5 minutes earlier, you could have voted. And he goes back home, shares the story with my father, with my aunts, with my uncle, and it becomes a part of them. And he dies before he has the opportunity. But as a result, my father, all of my uncles, aunts, they become a part of this voting rights movement. And what is so powerful is he attempted to vote out Eugene Talmadge. And my son was in Georgia at Morehouse. He was in Atlanta, he had an opportunity to vote for Senator Raphael Warnock, who has Eugene Talmadge's seat. So all of it comes around where my grandfather never got the opportunity to vote, but his great-grandson ends up voting in the person who takes over his seat. And sometimes the arc of God's movement is not in our generation, but will be 3 and 4 generations ahead of us.
Wow.
Wynton, I think for any of us who were lucky enough to be here the last time you were in residence at Chautauqua, we had the gift of seeing your father play. It was an incredible experience. You called him up on stage as part of that. And I wondered if you could also speak about the importance of our elders in our own work.
Well, Otis, he covered it, you know? And I had a great uncle who was born in 1883. When I was 6, I lived with him for a year. Back then, something would happen in your family. You never knew what was wrong. Y'all go and stay with so-and-so. And that great uncle was a stonecutter for the cemetery. And he also would go down to vote all the time and was denied. And he hated the statue of Robert E. Lee. It was not a statue I would ever notice. Later, Mitch Landrieu was mayor. We're both trumpet players. We went to high school at the same time. We were having a breakfast, and we were talking about all kinds of stuff, not even about that. I said, man, what about that statue of Robert E. Lee? I was just remembering my great uncle's hatred of that statue. Man, we need to take that statue down. He said, well, man, let me see whose jurisdiction it is. He came back, he called me maybe a month later. He said, man, you know, that damn thing is under my jurisdiction. He said, look, I will go through what it takes to take it down if you write a long article about it. Now, we're colleagues, both trumpet players in high school at the same time in the 70s, far removed from 1892 or whenever my uncle first became conscious of it. And Mitch's father had been mayor, was one of the most civil rights-minded mayors New Orleans ever had. And then he expended political capital to get that statue taken down. And I'm sure Kate has stories. We all have stories of people in our family who did things, and we're all connected. So to tie it back to what has been talked about is the macro and micro world that Dr. King exhibited, speaking about. We struggle as human beings with paradox. Paradoxical thinking we're not good at. We want to be right, and we want you to be wrong. So I had an experience, therefore everybody has that experience. And to create space for other people who don't think like you requires a macro understanding, and to actually create the mechanics of that space requires a micro understanding. So if you write a score, you think about, you have all of these people sitting on stage for an hour and a half, and you have to account graphically for everything everybody will do. Now, not only do you have to account for what they're going to do, but every note has to have a dot or a dash over it. Everything has its dynamics. Everything has to have a direction. So you have to conceive of a big form that has many families. You got bassoons, oboes, cellos. Everybody has different rules and organizations, percussion, this and that, singing. So you have to create space for everybody. Hey, when is my choir going to? What about my oboe? I can't have the oboe just sitting there. What about my violas? I need to give them something to play. They're bored sitting there. Then you have to do the micro work. So that's on the one thing of Dr. King as a macro thinker and a micro thinker. And they work together. And also, what Kate was saying is about permanence. You have a score that's fixed, But if it's in music, if it's in jazz music, we have some sections, it's only slashes. So when are we going to turn people loose? And with our younger musicians, what are we always saying with parts that are difficult? I hear them practicing it 1,000,000 times before we have to play it. You only got to play it once. If you mess it up, thank the good Lord, we're not in a fighter jet. Right? You're gonna be here tomorrow. Don't over practice these things and come to things with the spontaneity, like what she was saying in a performance. Now she's talking about a world premiere that they're putting together things so the audience has an impact. But let me tell you, like a good preacher knows, you know when the people with you, and you know when they're, and it was interesting what you said about, hey, when they're with you, you figure out what wave worked and what, well, I thought this was gonna be a climax, but it wasn't. Many things you think before you get in front of people, you think it will be a communal experience, but it is not. Do you have the humility to understand and not blame the people for something you need to? So that's kind of what I think about. And my father was a fantastic person, like Otis's father is, because he would always look at the macro and create space for everyone. He was the least tribal person I ever met. And there's so much tribalism today that people want to find a power base in people they perceive to be like them. Yeah. The coldest part of it all is those people really are not like you. They're people. So that was my father's teaching.
I want to thank you for the gift you gave our students who, the number of stories we heard where you basically told them to relax, right? I mean, they were so nerved up to have this opportunity with you, and thank you for giving them that gift this week.
We're not going into battle, we're playing a concert.
So Kate, you have done so much work in taking stories from the past and adapting them. That's certainly what you're doing now. You did that with Pride and Prejudice, which we performed last year. And I wonder if you could share with our audience, maybe some of them haven't seen The Light in the Dark yet, why you picked this particular story to resurrect. It's not a super well-known story. You're fixing that, and what you've learned from looking at the life of Artemisia Gentileschi.
Well, to build off what these two gentlemen are saying, you know, lately I've been thinking a lot about my elders, and in particular about my mother. My mother has led a complicated life, and we had a complicated relationship. But one thing she instilled in me when I was very, very young was to be a fighter and to never believe that my gender or the body that I was in should have, she raised me to believe that I should have the same rights as my brothers, and that I should be willing to use my voice to fight for those rights, and when I saw something was wrong, that I should say it, and that I should not be afraid of being, you know, feminine or likable or what have you, or pleasing to other people. And the reason why I decided to write this particular play is, and I promised myself when I wrote this play that, and my mother also instilled in me very young a sense of, if you're going to make something in this world, it has to be socially relevant. She marched for the ERA when she was pregnant with me. Thank you. I'm saying thank you like I did anything. I was just lying there. She got me a subscription to Ms. Magazine when I was 11 years old. So when I grew up and I was working in the theater industry, like all industries in the world, is a mirror held up to nature, and it has the same problems that the rest of society has. It has racism and sexism and all the isms, and I got very involved in anti-harassment work in my industry. It is a big problem in the theater industry where there are a lot of power imbalances, and I got involved with it within my union, the Actors Union. And as a result of that work, I heard a lot of survivors' stories, and I was feeling really profoundly disillusioned. I felt in love with this art form, but pretty appalled by stories I was hearing of how often institutions would fail survivors of behavior. And I was, thinking about this legacy I had been given from my mother and how that was seeming in direct contrast with the art I had chosen to give my life to. And I went on a much belated honeymoon with my husband in August 2022 in Italy. And I walked into the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and I saw a painting there by the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, who was the most famous female artist of her century in Italy. She was a brilliant artist of the Italian Renaissance. She was a greater artist than most artists of the time, and she was a survivor of sexual assault. She was put on trial for that sexual assault and tortured, and she took that trauma and she put it into her art, and she did a famous painting called Judith Beheading Holofernes, based on a Bible story, and she painted herself a self-portrait of her beheading her own rapist. She took what happened to her and she told the truth about it, and those paintings are paintings of rage and power and truth. And I tell you, I knew this much about this woman. I knew a little bit. And I stood in front of this giant painting in the Uffizi Gallery, and I felt the motes of dust that were this woman from 400 years ago reach down through the ages and go, snap out of it. You have a voice. The onus is on you to use it. I used it, so you tell the truth. You tell this story, you tell a complicated story, and you write this play. So then I ordered like 16 books and took a painting class and wrote this play. But it's because I believe so deeply in the legacy not only of our literal ancestors and of the people who fought so hard to get us here, but also in generations to come, in also our artistic ancestors and the ancestors of dissidents throughout the ages who are trying to make society better. And we are at a very careful, crazy tipping point right now, as our soon-to-be president, Kamala Harris, said last night. Woo! Fingers crossed, get out and vote, nothing is certain. But like, we are in a place where we are poised to have everyone poised to have potentially fewer rights than we've had. Certainly as a woman, bodily autonomy, I feel that very, very keenly. We are poised for my nieces to have less rights than my mother did when she was fighting for the ERA. So I feel very strongly that the arts and religious community is built to face hard truths and to tell complicated stories and to reflect what is nature back to itself. So hopefully we can do better and progress, because it is not certain. It is not certain. I feel that strongly.
So you've teed up a couple things for us, and I'd like to ask each of you to reflect on this, kind of as our last question, our last conversation piece before we go to Q&A. You mentioned the snap out of it moment and also these divisive times. And I'm wondering if each of you could talk about how you're viewing your own work amidst this period of division, how you're thinking of using that work, and what counsel or advice do you have for our audience on things that they might do to help bring us together? The theme of this week, trying to connect us versus dividing us. So a little bit about, are there projects or things that you're working on or ways you're thinking that will inform the next few months and after, and counsel for our audience on ways we can come together in this divided time. Otis, I'll start with you.
I think for me, the work that I've been involved in from a spiritual framework is coming to, well, I will use this quote. When I was at Morehouse, every young man knew this quote from Howard Thurman. They marched us into the chapel. None of us wanted to go. And the dean said to us this quote from Howard Thurman. He said, Howard Thurman says, God places a crown above your head. You will spend the rest of your life growing tall enough to wear. And then the dean said, and Morehouse is all-male school, said, young men, we hope that you will be taller tomorrow. And that is the work, kind of hammering out, working out this project, for me personally, through the lens of Black religiosity, which at the same time is local but is global. Because there is a demand to learn from other spaces. And in this moment, America operates out of a fundamentalist and originalist framework. We're originalist in reference to our judiciary, and we're fundamentalist in reference to our politics. And fundamentalism and originalism function out of a fear of someone introducing something new. And the only way that an artist can grow, a minister can grow, the only way that an architect can grow is that you have to bring something new into the conversation. Otherwise, you keep playing the same thing. You keep saying the same thing over and over and over. And all I want to be able to do, I will never reach the crown, but I want to be taller tomorrow.
Kate, how about you?
You know, I am a believer that there is a greater force outside of us that decides sort of what our purpose is in the greater design. And I also feel you are not in charge of how one is received by the world. And if you try to worry about it too much, you will implode like a dying star. And so I try to focus on saying something that feels important and also frightening. It's why I quite often am in my own work as well, because it feels pretty terrifying to put your own body on the line like that, and that's why I think with great risk comes great reward. What I often feel is an obligation to, again, tell the truth, try to reflect what you really see around you, and try to have a call to action in some way. And sort of the dream, at least for me, the dream of a theater maker is many years ago, like 100 years ago, they did a production of Waiting for Lefty, and they did it for workers who were under difficult conditions at a factory, and at the end of that play they go, strike, 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 and all the workers at the end of this play went, strike, 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 and they went out and went on strike. To me, that's like, good, to that. So, strike, strike, strike. So that is sort of the dream, but what I do want very much is to open people's minds, open people's hearts, make people reconsider what a hero or a heroine's journey is, and to actually see the world around them in more nuanced ways. And in order to do that work, I have to see the world in more nuanced ways, so it is an act of creating empathy in myself in order to try to create empathy in others, because it is such a trope, but it's true. If we all had much more empathy for each other, the world would be a much better place. So for me, it is like fling myself headlong into terrifying vulnerability in a hope that we can all be more vulnerable and empathetic with each other.
Well, I think that point that the thing that's the most vulnerable for a person is what they perceive to be their strength. The tribal thought is very powerful. That's your whole constituency. Everybody who loves you is because in you they see themselves. I talk about my father a lot, but my mother actually had the most influence on me. She was left-handed. She grew up extremely poor. She was unbelievably intelligent. She could do all my chemistry homework in high school and it would actually be right. She was very, very outspoken. She had 6 boys, and she struggled and had an unbelievably difficult time in the South as a woman of her intelligence. My grandmother, her mother, was a domestic worker, very quiet woman, very powerful in her own way, but everybody loved her. My mama, not so much. When people would come to my house, I would have to tell them, hey, don't play with my mama. She's not like the maid you saw on Good Times or something. If you anger her, she will set stuff straight for you in a very direct and serious way. And it won't be a joke. You won't laugh when it happens. Because it's not going to be like Aunt Jemima in any way. Have any relationship, well, honey, let me tell you. She was insightful. So I'm going to just leave with a story about my own fears and lack of understanding. I was lucky to be mentored by all of the greatest Afro-American artists that happened to be alive at my time of any genre. So Romare Bearden was my teacher in painting, Ralph Ellison in literature, August Wilson, playwright, I knew him very well. I played at his funeral. I hung with him all the time. I talked with him all the time. And they treated me with uncommon love and respect. It was like I was in their family. My main mentor was a guy named Albert Murray. He was in Strategic Air Command in the 1940s. He was the one black person in that I would always look at the picture on his wall. He was born in Alabama in 1911, somewhere around there. And he never talked about the racism he experienced. Now, I grew up in Kenner, Louisiana, much later than him, but I had a lot of experiences that rankled me and hit me the wrong way because I didn't take it lightly. I was like my mother. If you called me a word I didn't like, we were going to go at it. Now, I wasn't that big of a guy, so it wasn't like a movie. It meant you had to be really dedicated to come back the next day on top of a black eye to get another one. But I was dedicated to it. Teachers who were insulting, kids who were insulting, the situations we lived in, what the streets were like, what people were saying, ignorant movies that everybody was looking at, newspaper articles, everything I could see and perceive, the depth of the racism, it angered me so much that in classrooms, I was almost always, if not the best student, at least in my elementary school, one of the best. Oh, that was a great problem for everybody I went to school with. What grade did you make? What grade did you make? They always want to know. This is what I made. There was always a problem. So when I spoke with Mr. Murray, I was always complaining about it. Man, somebody did this to me. Man, I had to deal with this. Man, I got my behind whipped this time. Man, I had to do this. My teacher cheated me out of this, so-and-so and so-and-so. He listened to me, and I started to goad him. I said, man, you grew up in Alabama. You trying to tell me white folks didn't mess with you at all? You don't have nothing to tell me? So he looked at me one day and he said, man, of all the white people you knew, nobody ever did anything good for you? I said, Chad, man, when I was in 6th grade or something, I was fighting all the white boys every time they would call me the N-word, and the biggest kid in the class came to me and said, man, you gonna fight everybody? I said, yeah, if they call me out my name. He said, the next time I'm gonna jump in. I said, damn, I gotta fight you too? He said, no, man, I'm gonna be with you. And he was with me. And he looked at me and said, well, tell stories about him too. Then the room was quiet. Tell stories about him too, because that too is real. So that's the thing I believe about what's wrong a lot of times with our country. The stories we are receiving are not the real stories because they have to be tribalized. It is a source of power, but it's false power, it's fake. And when you travel around the world, you understand we are people. And that's the one fact that we can depend on. People are on earth. That's it.
We're going to move into our Q&A section now. Wynton, you evoked a lot of ancestors and people that were important to you. A member of our audience is asking each of you, and maybe I'll have Otis and Kate continue that, who were the major influences in your life that when you look at where you are now, you think, if not for, I wouldn't be here right now?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question?
Who were the major influences in your life where you think, if not for that person, I would not be here right now?
You know, I have older brothers who were very, who really, I have older brothers who were really there for me during often a difficult childhood, and a younger brother who was there for me during a difficult childhood, and we had the childhood together. And they've always been so loving and accepting me for all of my many, many, many quirks. And they are people who really believe in treating life's difficulties with honesty, but also with humor. So I never would have gotten through without my brothers and my sister. And I also have to shout out to my husband, Jason O'Connell, who is also in The Light in the Dark. You can see him playing some guy who creeps me out. But he is an incredibly supportive person. He reads all my first drafts, which are always terrible, as are always, first drafts always are. But he is just a wellspring of unconditional love and support. And when I am frightened to try something, he encourages me to do it. And, you know, he is like the person who inspires me to try bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. So that's my husband.
Along with that, I would say my family. Of course, my mother and my father, Monica, my wife, my children have been incredibly inspiring to me. Having children changes you on so many levels, and much of who I am and my understanding has come through witnessing their creativity and their brilliance. And then there's one particular person who's no longer with us, my sister, My sister Daphne Moss, was an incredible human being, brilliant. She was a poet, she was a writer, she was a teacher. She struggled with mental health issues, paranoid schizophrenia. When I was a child, though, she would read to me. She was 9 years my senior. She would read to me before I went to bed. But she wouldn't read me typical children's stories. She would read Zora Neale Hurston to me. And she would read James Baldwin. She would read Maya Angelou. And so I didn't know what she was reading. She said, look, I'll read you a story if you just be quiet and go to bed. She was babysitting, basically. So when I get to college, I'm in my intro to literature class, and I'm realizing I can quote Baldwin. Because my sister read that to me as a child. The reason I love jazz is because my sister, the first jazz concert I was ever taken to was to see you by my sister.
Right.
She purchased tickets and said, I want you to hear Wynton Marsalis. So, I mean, she has been was a huge influence on my life, and I can't thank her enough. She is always with me.
So a parallel question. So those are folks that have been a part of your lives that have helped you get to this point. You all represent people who are at the height of your vocations. Who do you see younger than you that's coming next? Who are the people we should be watching? Anyone?
I mean, I got a list of 40 people. I could just, Sean Mason on the piano, Joe Block on piano, Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, singer, you know, Philip Norris, bassist, Damo Branch, drummer, Abdias Armentero, saxophone, Chris Lewis, saxophone. I could just go on, and Robbie Lee, vocals, Summer Camargo, trumpet, great. I could just fantastic young Alexa Tarantino, alto saxophone leader. Goes on and on. They're great. They're great. I have great students. I love them. We talk, we argue all the time. Damn, they can play. I love them. I mean, you're kind of young for that long list, but I'm sure you have a beautiful list too. Hey, you know, younger people.
Yeah, I feel like we're in a really exciting era of theater making in the United States. I mean, for all its precarity, it is no secret that theaters are in trouble across the United States. Over the pandemic, theaters lost a lot of subscribers, they've lost a lot of funding, they've lost a lot of their base, and in the United States of America, we get almost zero federal support for theater. Thank you so much, write your congressperson. Chuck Schumer, I am writing you again. But despite that, there's some really unbelievable playwrights coming out right now. I mean, and they come from all generations. Paula Vogel, I'm a big Paula Vogel fan girl. James Ames, who wrote Fat Ham. Fat Ham was one of my favorite things. There's a young playwright. He's going to be mortified that I'm talking about him because he is just starting out, but called Jacoby Johnson, who I think is just phenomenal. So I'm going to say his name here. And when he's super famous in 15 years, you can all say you heard it here first. But there are so many. Maren Ireland just wrote this play in New York that I was just called Pre-Existing Condition, which was one of my favorite things I've seen in years. And I was in desperate floods of tears about domestic violence that I saw, and I just thought was unbelievably affecting. But I mean, it's dozens and dozens and dozens of names. There are so many theater makers now that are really exciting. Yeah, Janine Neighbors is one of my favorite playwrights in the world. She is currently working a lot in TV, but the American theater is sleeping on Janine Neighbors, and it should not, because she's a genius. And those are just some names that come right to mind. But Janine and I are contemporaries. A lot of these are my contemporaries. But Jacoby is younger, and he is going to be a big deal, and he's going to be like, why is she talking about me? But I've read his plays, and he's a genius, so.
There are so many. Cole Arthur Riley is a writer. I would say she is truly, young sister, she's this generation's Howard Thurman. Absolutely brilliant. And if you have the opportunity to pick up her writing, you will be blown away by the poetry, the thoughtfulness. She's extraordinary. Minister Reverend Mahogany Thomas, who runs Bread for the City in Washington, D.C., is one of the most thoughtful young ministers. And I say she served as an intern at our church, and we were just blown away by her witness and the work that she is doing. Another is Reverend Raquel Gill, who's from South Carolina and merges South Carolina and Brooklyn, unlike anybody I have ever seen. It is a beautiful thing to witness. Dr. Charlie Dates in Chicago. He is a colleague and a friend, and he's actually pastoring 2 churches. Took over one of the largest churches in Chicago. Dr. Dates has done something not very many people are able to do. He has been able to lead a group who were traditionally conservative evangelicals, bring the Black church prophetic tradition and help them see what they are missing in their theology. It's been quite extraordinary to see that work happen by Dr. Dates, along with my colleague, Reverend Reginald Sharp, who is probably one of the most gifted young preachers in this country. Maybe 30, what is he, 30 now? 31. But you would think that he's been around for 120 years because he has an old soul. And he has an ability to be able to talk to elders and Generation Z in a beautiful way, but is so thoughtful. Dr. Jennifer Carner in Atlanta, she's getting her PhD at Christian Theological in Indianapolis. She serves as a minister in Atlanta, but she's specializing in studying and learning the voices of 19th century Black women preachers and looking at the rhetorical tradition of what they would use to speak about racism and about sexism simultaneously. She's doing some amazing work, and she herself is tremendous. Elijah Gatlings, Elijah's what, 21? He is going to be some. Remember that name, Elijah Gatlings. He's got a great preacher name, Elijah Gatlings. He's got a great preacher name, you know. And DeMar Clark, who is doing great work, and Dr. Winfred Rice, Dr. Rice at Morehouse. Oh my gosh, he is tremendous professor and also preacher, just mentoring a whole new group of scholars and theologians. There's just so many. There's just so many people just doing great work, but you won't see them on YouTube and Instagram. You're not going to see them lifted up, pasted up everywhere, but they are just doing incredible, incredible work.
So we have time for one last question. I'd love for each of you to reflect on this. How do we rise above the tribalism that Wynton refers to, and also make sure that everyone's being included and not left behind waving their hands and saying, don't forget about us?
I think you make it be your primary objective to create space for others like we're trying to do up here. We all have a voice, we have something to say, it's interesting, everything everybody is saying. Make that your objective. Create space, get some blood to the capillaries.
Yeah, I think I believe that the energy you come at people with, they will often reflect back to you, not uniformly, but often. And so what I'm often trying to do is, as Wynton says, open up space in myself and challenge my own assumptions often, so that I can have fewer snap judgments. It must be said, I'm working on it in myself. I'm a little bit, think some of us were born to build bridges and some were born to build barricades, and I'm a little more like, singing La Marseillaise or whatever, but it's a little bit more me, is the Molotov cocktail person. But as I get older, I am always more and more trying to see that everyone believes that they are the hero or heroine of their own story, that everyone is coming at the world based on their own given circumstances and based on the experiences that they've had. And as I get older and older, I'm always trying to unpack in myself othering people or not creating space for what they have. We may profoundly disagree on things, but because I want them to respect where I'm coming from, I need to try to respect where they're coming from and try to have empathy for it and understand it.
I would add that the necessity to learn other people's songs becomes important for us to grow and develop. The other piece that is universal is learning other people's foods. But don't let someone serve you, get in the kitchen and create. Because it changes the conversation. There's a different conversation in every kitchen than there is a conversation at the table. And we have to find the kitchen conversation becomes important. The other thing, I remember my father, he did a sermon years ago. I'll never forget the illustration that he used, that he was flying back from Japan to Cleveland, Ohio. And he said that there was a baby, who was crying. And he said in his sermon, and it was so beautiful how he said it, he said, I was in the front of the plane, and we heard the baby crying. We didn't know, the baby didn't cry in Japanese nor in English, but cried in a language that everyone could hear. And then when they landed, they heard the baby laughing. The baby didn't laugh in Japanese nor laugh in English, but laughed in a language that we all could understand. That crying and laughter are universal Holy Spirit actions. When you want to laugh, you cannot hold it in. And when you want to cry, you cannot keep it inside. And it's something that acts on us in such a way. And if we can find the laughter, but be unafraid of the tears, then maybe we can break from some of the tribes that we operate out of.
Chautauqua, please join me in thanking Wynton Marsalis, Kate Hamill, and Reverend Otis Moss III.